Hey guys! Today I'm going to take you through 4 easy steps to paint your furniture. A very simple and cost friendly way of updating furniture pieces is by simply painting them. I will take you through a step by step on how I refinish these nightstands and provide some quick tips and tricks that I've learned over the years. As you can tell here, the nightstands are in good condition. They have some water damage on the top and the drawers, and the bottom legs were a little bit busted. But these are perfect candidates for a paint project. Step number 1, disassemble and clean off. First things first with any project, you always have to disassemble it and clean it. It makes things 100% much easier for you. To disassemble, I like using this electric screwdriver. It is super simple. It's righty tighty and lefty loosey. So you twist it to the left, it will unscrew things. You twist it to the right, and it screws. You can also switch the head out to a flat head, an Allen, a star. I've even seen some that are like squares, and it's very simple. It adapts to just about anything. Here's a quick tip. Place all the loose hardware pieces in a Ziploc bag. This way they stay together and you reduce the likelihood of losing anything. If you're working multiple projects at the same time, I suggest labeling the bag. I like nicknaming my pieces as simple as a farmhouse coffee table or as inventive as a Beauty and the Beast bedroom set because it had like an old French feel to it. It doesn't really matter. All that's important is to keep everything together and not lose the hardware. To clean the piece, I like to use some simple warm water and soap. But I have also seen other flippers use all-purpose cleaners and some other type of degreasers to clean the furniture. Whatever you do, do not skip this step. There's some natural oils and dirt on the surface that we do not want to be penetrating into the wood as we're going through these steps. It is so important to clean it so that you can get the best finish possible. Step number 2, sand down the piece. For this particular piece, I am starting off with a 120 grit sandpaper. The goal here is to remove the finishing coat and scuff up any bumps and imperfections that the surface might have. Depending on the material and damage, will determine what grade of sandpaper I use. If I am working with solid wood, I start off with a little bit more of a rough sandpaper. If I'm going to work with a veneer, then I start off with a finer sandpaper. So, my rule of thumb is if you don't know what you're working with, go with a fine, thin sandpaper and work your way up. That way, you can adjust as needed. As far as sanders go, I have used the random orbit sander and I've also used the particular one I'm using here, Ryobi corner cat sanders. I think that they're both great. They're both lightweight, they're user friendly, they're budget friendly. I have not invested in any of those $600 to $800 sanders. I bet that's probably going to be my next big investment. But for beginners, I think these are two great options. I'll make sure to add some links at the bottom in the description below. Here's your next quick tip. The lower the grit, the rougher the sandpaper. So I typically start off with a 120 to 220, and the roughest grit I typically use is an 80. And I'll use a 400 grit sandpaper from time to time to sand in between each sealing coat, but typically for prepping a piece, it's a 120 to 220. Once all the sanding is down and before moving to the next step, always, always, always clean off all that dust excess that's going to be everywhere. This is important because you don't want to mix the dust with the paint. It's going to end up giving you all sorts of bumps on the surfaces, a rough texture, and it's just going to look very unappealing. This step right here, I'm going to call it a 2B, adding a layer of shellac. You can totally skip this step if you're working with a non water damaged piece. However, in my case, these nightstands had some water damage on the top. And in order to protect them from further water damage, I'm going to add a layer of shellac. This product is also great to help if you have any oil stains or any like dark color wood, like a mahogany color comes to mind. It basically creates a block to prevent it from penetrating the paint. It can also block odors. I think of pieces that have been maybe in a house where there was a smoker. All that smoke smell does get into the wood, and sometimes you want to block that odor out. And finally, some people also use it as a high gloss varnish. You can find it in a liquid form, like what I'm using, or they also have it in a spray form. Step number 3, prime and paint. It is important to add a layer of all purpose primer. This is going to help for a couple things. It's going to cover up any previous paint, it's going to seal unpainted surfaces, and it's going to provide a cohesive and even surface to paint on, allowing the paint to adhere better. You can find these in oil base and water based. Typically, I like to use water based because most of my furniture pieces go inside a house. But if I'm going to do something that's for outdoor, I would definitely recommend using an oil based all purpose primer. You can also find these in spray cans, or you can use the liquid form like I'm using here. Another thing worth mentioning is how I like to add a little bit of black paint into my white primer for darker pieces. You don't have to do this. I personally like to. You can also purchase dark base primer already mixed together. That's totally available as well. When it comes to painting, I personally use a foam roller. This has given me the best results as far as smooth surfaces go and a super friendly budget. I have painted with a brush. It tends to give me strokes and uneven surfaces, so I don't use that anymore unless I'm sealing. Sometimes, if I seal, I use a brush. As far as a paint sprayer goes, I do have one, but it's given me all sorts of textures on the surface that I do not like. I've tried a couple tricks to try to help that, but it just hasn't worked. I really think it's just the quality of the sprayer. One day, probably I'll invest again in something like that, but for now, a foam roller has given me the best results. Always remember to lightly sand in between each layer of paint. I use a 220 grit sandpaper and I clean off all the dust. You're looking to remove any small bumps and imperfections, and you're also testing the surface to ensure that no primer comes off of the surface. This is what I call the scratch test, aka, if small pieces of paint come off the surface, that means I did not sand enough. So I have to go back a step. The primer needs to adhere correctly to the piece of furniture. If not, things just get worse. So it must pass this scratch test. quick tip. Place a layer of aluminum foil on the paint tray for easy cleanup. I love doing this because whenever I'm done, I simply just throw away the aluminum foil and I just have to clean the foam roller itself. It's a quick clean and it's great. Another quick tip. Spray paint hardware to give it an updated look. Hardware can be so expensive. So, something I like to do to give an updated look is a quick spray paint. Similar to furniture, I clean it off, I give it a quick sanding, and then I spray paint it the color I'm looking for. Step number 4, seal the piece. Last step before you reassemble is to seal the piece. There are so many different type of sealants out there. There's polyacrylics, there's wax, there's polyurethane, and there's so many other ones. They can be in glossy finish, semi-gloss, satin, matte. There's so many. So, here's my personal favorite. It is polyurethane, either in a satin or in a matte finish. Lately, matte finish has become very, very popular. So, my recent pieces I've been doing in a matte finish. However, for this particular finish, because it's so dark, I wanted to do it in a little bit of a satin finish so that it gave it a little bit more life. I like to add 2 to 3 layers of polyurethane to ensure that it's fully sealed, especially when you have highly used surfaces like the tabletop of these nightstands. Last and final quick tip. Add a little bit of paint to the sealer to avoid any cloudiness. When sealing a dark paint of color, sometimes the contrast between the dark color and the sealer can cause a cloudy layer. So to avoid this, simply add a little bit of paint to the sealer and it will negate this issue completely. And finally, if you want to call this step 4B, reassemble and stage for pictures. Putting everything back together and staging for final pictures is so important. I sell most of my pieces. It is rare for me to keep them just because this is how I make a living. So I love staging it and making people realize the potential that they have in their own homes. And I think this is one of the beautiful parts of refinishing furniture. To summarize what we covered in this video, it was 4 easy steps to paint your furniture. Number 1, disassemble and clean. Number 2, sand down the piece. Number 3, prime and paint. And number 4, seal the piece. I hope this video helped you narrow down and simplify the process of painting furniture. I hope it inspired you to take on your own piece. If it did, please make sure to like and subscribe to my channel. I'll make sure to add a link in the description below to the equipment and materials that I like to use in these transformations. I hope you guys like this transformation as much as I did, and I will see you guys next time here at Angie's Crafts Furniture Renovation. Goodbye!